The crimson sky bled into darkness as Olivia Thorne's family homestead burned to ash, her screams lost in the roar of hungry flames. Wyoming Territory, 1875, a place where mercy was as rare as rainfall and twice as precious. Her lungs filled with smoke as she crawled through the burning remnants of the only home she'd ever known, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Olivia had been just 22 when everything changed. The daughter of a prosperous rancher, she'd lived a life of relative privilege in Ruby City, Wyoming. Her father, James Thorne, had built a thriving cattle operation and a handsome two-story home that stood proudly against the vast prairie landscape. Her mother had passed years ago, leaving Olivia to become the lady of the house, caring for her father and younger brother Matthew. The attack came without warning. She'd been preparing supper when the first shots rang out. Through the window, she spotted riders, at least 6 of them faces obscured by bandanas as they surrounded the house. Her father grabbed his Winchester and ordered her to hide Matthew in the root cellar. "It's the Harmon gang," he'd said grimly. "They've been threatening since I testified against their cousin." The ensuing gunfight was brief and brutal. From her hiding place, Olivia heard her father fall. Then came the splashing sounds, the acrid smell of coal oil, and finally, the terrifying crackle of flames taking hold. Matthew panicked. Before she could stop him, the 14-year-old boy bolted from their hiding place. Olivia chased after him only to see him cut down by a bullet. She screamed, drawing the attention of the attackers. A blow to her head sent her sprawling across the burning floor. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was rough hands dragging her brother's body away and someone saying, "Make sure they are all dead. Burn everything to the ground." Now, as consciousness returned in painful waves, Olivia realized she lay among the smoldering ruins of her home. The attack had happened at dusk, and now the cold night air bit at her exposed skin. She couldn't move. Her dress was charred, her once honey-blonde hair singed and matted with blood. The pain was overwhelming. Burns covered her arms and legs, and each breath sent daggers through her chest. She didn't know how many hours passed as she drifted between consciousness and blessed darkness. The cold Wyoming night settled over her like a shroud, and she felt her body temperature dropping dangerously. Death seemed inevitable and perhaps merciful. As dawn broke across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink that seemed to mock her suffering, Olivia heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. With tremendous effort, she tried to call out, but her parched throat produced only a rasping whisper. The hoofbeats stopped. Boot steps approached cautiously. "Sweet Jesus!" A man's deep voice breathed through swollen eyelids. Olivia glimpsed a tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. He knelt beside her, his weathered face coming into focus mid-30s, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice gentle as he assessed her injuries. She tried to respond, but only managed a pained whimper. The stranger carefully removed his sheepskin coat and draped it over her. His hands were large and calloused, but they moved with surprising tenderness as he examined her for broken bones. "I'm Bryce Xavier," he said, continuing to talk in a soothing voice. "I was heading to Ruby City when I saw the smoke. Thought the fire might have been recent, but looks like it happened hours ago." He disappeared from her view momentarily, returning with a canteen. With infinite care, he supported her head and brought the water to her cracked lips. "Small sips now, that's it." The water was like nectar, but swallowing proved agonizing. Bryce frowned at her obvious distress. "You're badly hurt, miss. Burns, smoke inhalation may be worse." I need to get you to a doctor." His eyes swept over the destruction. "Was this your home? Is anyone else?" Olivia managed to whisper, "All gone. Father, Matthew, they killed them." Bryce's expression hardened. "The Harmon gang," her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "They've been terrorizing homesteaders across 3 counties," he explained. "I've been tracking them for months." When she looked confused, he added, "I'm a federal marshal, but that's not important right now. What matters is getting you help." With extreme caution, Bryce slid his arms beneath her. "This is going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but I've got to move you." Despite his care, Olivia couldn't suppress a cry of pain as he lifted her. Bryce whispered reassurances as he carried her to his horse, a sturdy palomino that stood patiently nearby. Mounting while holding her proved difficult, but Bryce managed it with minimal jostling. He positioned her across his lap, one arm securely around her waist. "Ruby City's about 2 hours' ride," he said. "You just hold on. Stay with me." As the horse began walking, each step sending fresh waves of agony through her burned body, Olivia felt herself slipping away again. The last thing she registered was Bryce's arms tightening protectively around her and his voice in her ear. "Your hands are like ice," he murmured, taking both her hands in one of his. "But you'll warm again in my arms. I promise you that." The journey to Ruby City remained forever a blur in Olivia's memory. Fragments surfaced occasionally, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the warmth of Bryce's chest against her cheek, his voice urging her to stay awake, to hold on just a little longer. Mostly, though, there was pain and the merciful darkness that periodically swallowed it. Dr. Samuel Abernathy's clinic occupied a small, whitewashed building on Ruby City's Main Street. The elderly physician had seen his share of tragedy in 4 decades of frontier medicine, but the sight of Marshal Xavier riding in with a barely conscious burned woman still made him curse under his breath. "Harmon gang," Bryce explained tersely as the doctor directed him to place Olivia on an examination table. "Found her in what's left of the Thorne place about 10 miles east. James Thorne's girl." Dr. Abernathy's bushy eyebrows shot up. "Good God, what about James and the boy?" "Dead, according to her. I didn't see bodies, but there was blood that the fire didn't quite reach." Bryce stepped back, his expression grim. "Will she make it, Doc?" The physician didn't answer immediately. He worked methodically, cutting away what remained of Olivia's charred clothing and examining the extent of her injuries. Second-degree burns covered much of her arms and legs. Her hands, remarkably, had suffered less damage, protected perhaps by how she'd fallen. Smoke inhalation had damaged her lungs, and a deep gash on her temple suggested she'd been struck hard enough to cause concussion. "She's young and strong," Dr. Abernathy finally said. "If infection doesn't set in, she has a fighting chance, but the next few days will tell the tale." Bryce nodded, his jaw tight. "I need to report to Sheriff Coleman, then head back out to the Thorne place. There might be tracks, something to point me toward the Harmons." The doctor glanced up from cleaning Olivia's wounds. "You've been chasing those animals for months without catching them. What makes you think this time will be different?" "Because this time they've made it personal," Bryce answered, his voice cold. His eyes lingered on Olivia's unconscious form. "Keep her alive, Doc. I'll be back." The next 3 days passed in a haze of fever and pain for Olivia. Dr. Abernathy worked tirelessly, applying salves to her burns, forcing broths and medicines past her lips, changing dressings and watching vigilantly for signs of infection. Mrs. Abernathy, the doctor's wife, sat with her through the nights, bathing her forehead with cool cloths when fever raged. On the morning of the 4th day, Olivia opened her eyes to full consciousness for the first time since the attack. Sunshine streamed through gingham curtains, casting patterns across a simple bedroom. She tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain flared across her body. "Easy now," came a woman's gentle voice. Mrs. Abernathy appeared in her field of vision, a kind-faced woman in her 60s. "You've been through quite an ordeal, Miss Thorne." "Where?" Olivia's voice emerged as a raspy whisper. "You're at our home behind my husband's clinic. Marshal Xavier brought you in 4 days ago." Mrs. Abernathy helped Olivia sip water from a tin cup. "He found you at your family's ranch after the fire." Memory crashed back with brutal clarity: the attack, her father's body, Matthew running into the gunfire. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. "They're really gone," she whispered, though she knew the answer. Mrs. Abernathy nodded solemnly. "I'm so sorry, child. Marshal Xavier and some men from town recovered their bodies. They were laid to rest in the cemetery 2 days ago." Olivia closed her eyes, grief overwhelming her. She'd missed her family's burial. They were gone, and she hadn't even been able to say goodbye. "The marshal also found tracks," Mrs. Abernathy continued, her tone shifting. "He believes it was indeed the Harmon gang. He rode out with Sheriff Coleman and a posse." Over the next week, Olivia's physical recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Her burns began to heal, though Dr. Abernathy warned they would leave scars. Her voice strengthened as the damage from smoke inhalation improved. But emotionally, she remained adrift in a sea of loss and uncertainty. Word of the attack spread through Ruby City, and visitors began arriving at the Abernathy's home. Mayor Jenkins and his wife brought flowers and condolences. The Reverend Simmons offered prayers and the comfort of Scripture. Mrs. Patterson from the general store brought a trunk of clothes, simple but clean garments to replace what Olivia had lost. Most were kind, genuinely concerned for the young woman who'd lost everything. A few, Olivia could tell, came merely out of morbid curiosity. All asked the same questions. Had she seen the attackers? Could she identify them? What would she do now? "The Thornes were good people," Mayor Jenkins said during his visit. "Your father was respected in this community. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you just say the word." What Olivia needed most her family returned to her. No one could provide. Beyond that, she had no answers. The Thorne ranch was gone, the cattle likely scattered or stolen. The money her father kept in the house had burned with everything else. At 22, unmarried and now alone, her options were painfully limited. "You could stay with us, dear," Mrs. Abernathy offered one evening. "Help around the clinic. Samuel could use an assistant, and you've shown a steady hand with the bandaging." It was a generous offer, but Olivia couldn't imagine rebuilding her life in Ruby City, where every familiar face and place would remind her of what she'd lost. 10 days after the attack, Dr. Abernathy deemed Olivia well enough to sit on the small porch behind the clinic. Wrapped in a quilt despite the mild spring day, she watched chickens scratch in the yard and tried to make sense of her shattered world. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 4 riders appeared, dust-covered and weary. At their head rode Bryce Xavier, his expression thunderous. Behind him came Sheriff Coleman and 2 deputies, one supporting what appeared to be a wounded companion. Mrs. Abernathy hurried out. "Samuel," she called toward the clinic. "The posse is back and Lester Johnson's hurt, as Dr. Abernathy rushed to help the injured deputy. Bryce dismounted and approached Olivia. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched on his features. His clothes were travel-worn, his face covered in trail dust beneath his hat. But his eyes, those startlingly blue eyes she remembered from her rescue, softened when they met hers. "Miss Thorne," he said, removing his hat, "it's good to see you up and about. Marshal Xavier." Olivia inclined her head slightly. "Mrs. Abernathy told me you were pursuing the men who attacked my family. Bryce's jaw tightened. We were. Tracked them nearly to the Montana border before losing their trail in the mountains. They ambushed us in a narrow pass. Lester took a bullet in the shoulder. I'm sorry. Don't be. This isn't over. He glanced toward the clinic where the wounded deputy was being tended. The Harmons have always been slippery, but they've never been this bold before, attacking a respected rancher, killing a child. He shook his head. Something's changed. They're escalating. Olivia studied the marshal's face. There was something personal in his determination, something beyond the call of duty. You knew my father, she asked. Not well, Bryce admitted. Met him a few times when I passed through Ruby City. He seemed like a good man. Honest. He was, Olivia said softly. Too honest, perhaps. He believed in doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. She paused, remembering her father's final words. He testified against someone connected to the Harmons. That's why they came for us. Bryce nodded grimly. That tracks with what we know. Luther Harmon's cousin Jeb was hanged in Cheyenne 3 months ago for murdering a shopkeeper. Your father was a key witness. They fell silent, watching as Sheriff Coleman helped the wounded deputy into the clinic. What will you do now? Bryce finally asked. Olivia sighed. I don't know. There's nothing left for me here, but I have nowhere else to go. You have family back east. My mother had a sister in Boston, but we lost touch years ago. Bryce seemed about to say something more when Sheriff Coleman approached, interrupting their conversation. Xavier, we need to send telegrams to the marshal's offices in Montana and Idaho, alert them about the Harmons. The sheriff nodded respectfully to Olivia. Miss Thorne, good to see you recovering. As the men walked away to discuss their next moves, Olivia watched Bryce's retreating figure. Despite everything, she felt an unexpected sense of security in his presence, a feeling that vanished as soon as he rode out of Ruby City the following morning, continuing his pursuit of the Harmon gang. The weeks that followed settled into a quiet routine. Olivia's burns healed slowly, the angry red giving way to pink skin that Dr. Abernathy assured her would continue to improve. She began helping around the clinic, discovering she had an aptitude for medical work that surprised both her and the doctor. The physical activity and sense of purpose proved therapeutic, giving her less time to dwell on her losses. News trickled in about the Harmons. They'd reportedly been sighted in Idaho Territory, then vanished again. Marshal Xavier's name appeared occasionally in these reports, always in pursuit but never quite catching his quarry. Spring blossomed into summer. Mayor Jenkins, acting as executor of James Thorne's estate, managed to locate the deed to the ranch property and a previously unknown bank account in Cheyenne. Though the house and barns were gone and most of the cattle lost, the land itself and the modest savings provided Olivia with some financial security. You could rebuild, the mayor suggested. Hire some hands, start over. Olivia considered it, but couldn't imagine returning to the site of so much tragedy. Instead, she used some of the funds to rent a small room above the millinery shop and continued working with Dr. Abernathy. Ruby City was changing too. The railroad was coming, bringing prosperity and new settlers. The rough-hewn mining town was gradually transforming into something more civilized. A new school was built. The Cattlemen's Hotel added a proper restaurant. Even the notorious Red Garter Saloon received a fresh coat of paint and began advertising itself as a gentleman's establishment. As summer waned, Olivia found herself adapting to her new circumstances better than she'd expected. The pain of her losses hadn't diminished, but she'd learned to carry it differently. She made new friends: Beth Whitaker, the young schoolteacher, Henry Simmons, The Reverend's son who worked at the telegraph office, Clara Jenkins, the mayor's outspoken daughter who scandalized the town by wearing trousers and studying law books. Yet despite these connections, Olivia often felt alone in a fundamental way. The trauma she'd experienced set her apart, and in quiet moments, she found herself wondering about Bryce Xavier, the man who had pulled her from the ashes and then vanished in pursuit of justice. Late August brought unseasonable thunderstorms that swelled creek beds and turned roads to mud. Olivia was returning to her room after a long day at the clinic, umbrella providing scant protection against the driving rain, when a rider appeared at the far end of the street. Even through the downpour, she recognized the broad shoulders and distinctive Palomino horse. Her heart quickened unexpectedly. Bryce Xavier had returned to Ruby City. He didn't see her at first, focused on guiding his horse through the muddy street toward the sheriff's office. Olivia watched as he dismounted stiffly, favoring his left side in a way that suggested injury. Without conscious decision, she changed direction, hurrying toward him. "Marshal Xavier," he turned at her call, water streaming from the brim of his hat. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by something warmer. "Miss Thorne," he said, a smile breaking through his evident exhaustion, "you're looking well." "And you're looking half drowned," she replied, stepping closer to share her umbrella. "And injured, unless I miss my guess." Bryce's smile turned rueful. "Caught a bullet graze a week ago, nothing serious." "Dr. Abernathy should be the judge of that. The clinic's still open." He hesitated, glancing toward the sheriff's office. "I should report in first. I've got news about the Harmons." Something in his tone made Olivia's breath catch. "You found them, some of them." His eyes held her steadily. "Luther Harmon is dead, so are two of his brothers." The news hit Olivia with unexpected force. For months, the Harmon gang had existed in her mind as faceless embodiments of evil. To hear that some had been brought to justice violently, she presumed stirred complex emotions. "How?" she asked simply. "They tried to rob a bank in Helena. It went badly for them. I wasn't even there, arrived 2 days after it happened." Bryce's expression darkened. "But there were still 3 brothers unaccounted for. I tracked them south, lost them near the Idaho border." Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The rain intensified. "You can tell me more after Dr. Abernathy looks at that wound," Olivia said firmly. "You'll catch your death in this weather." Bryce looked as though he might argue, then nodded, suddenly appearing every bit as weary as a man who'd been riding hard for months deserved to be. They walked together to the clinic, Olivia noticing how he unconsciously positioned himself between her and the muddy street, protecting her dress from splashes despite his own sodden condition. The clinic was quiet when they arrived. "Doctor." Abernathy looked up from his ledger, surprise registering at the sight of the mud-splattered marshal. "Xavier, didn't expect to see you back in these parts. Didn't expect to be back so soon myself, Doc." The older man's experienced eye quickly noted how Bryce held himself. "Wounded." "It's nothing. He took a bullet to his side about a week ago," Olivia interrupted. "And he's been riding in this weather." Dr. Abernathy sighed. "Of course he has." "Well, come on back, Marshal. Let's have a look." Olivia prepared the examination room, gathering clean bandages and disinfectant. When Bryce entered and began removing his wet coat, she turned to leave, mindful of propriety. "Stay," Bryce said, the single word stopping her at the doorway. "If you're helping the doc these days, I'd rather have you assist than leave him short-handed." Dr. Abernathy raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Miss Thorne has indeed become quite valuable around here. Steady hands and a quick mind." Olivia hesitated only briefly before returning to help. As Bryce unbuttoned his shirt, She kept her expression professionally neutral despite the fluttering in her stomach. The marshal was powerfully built, his torso bearing the evidence of a hard life, old scars crisscrossing tanned skin, the newest injury an angry red furrow along his left rib cage. "Bullet graze, like you said," Dr. Abernathy confirmed after examination. "But it's infected." "Not surprising, given you've been riding through God knows what conditions without proper care." Bryce accepted the diagnosis stoically as the doctor cleaned the wound, applied a poultice, and wrapped fresh bandages around his torso. Throughout the procedure, his eyes occasionally met Olivia's, holding her gaze for moments that seemed charged with unspoken thoughts. "You'll need to rest," Dr. Abernathy said when he'd finished. "At least 3 days. Keep the wound clean and dry. Miss Thorne can change the dressing tomorrow." "I've got a room at the cattlemen's," Bryce said, carefully putting his shirt back on. "And I need to speak with Sheriff Coleman tonight." "The sheriff can wait until morning," Olivia said firmly. "You're dead on your feet, Marshal." Bryce looked as though he might argue, then his shoulders slumped slightly. "Perhaps you're right. It has been a long ride." Dr. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Miss Thorne has a way of being right about such things. Now I should check on Mrs. Fulton, the baby's due any day." "Olivia, would you mind locking up after the marshal leaves?" After the doctor departed, a curious silence fell between them. Olivia busied herself tidying the examination room while Bryce finished dressing. "You seem settled here," he observed. "Working with the doctor suits you." Olivia nodded. "It gives me purpose. After everything, I needed that." "I understand." Bryce hesitated, then added, "I've thought about you often, wondered how you were faring." The simple admission warmed something in Olivia's chest. "I've thought of you too." Especially when reports would come about the Harmons. Another silence, this one heavier with things unsaid. "Will you continue pursuing the remaining Harmons?" she finally asked. Bryce's expression hardened. "Yes, but not immediately. I've been recalled to Cheyenne for reassignment. My superior believes I've become too personally invested in this case." "And have you?" His blue eyes met hers directly. "Yes." The single word held such intensity that Olivia found herself momentarily unable to respond. Outside, thunder rumbled again, punctuating the tension between them. "I should get to the hotel," Bryce said, breaking the moment. "Thank you for your assistance, Miss Thorne." "Olivia," she said impulsively. "After everything, I think you might call me Olivia." A smile softened his features. "Olivia then, and I'm Bryce." "Good night, Bryce. Please come by tomorrow for that dressing change." He nodded, donning his still damp coat with a slight wince. At the door he paused, looking back at her. "It's good to see you healing, Olivia, in all ways." After he left, Olivia stood motionless in the quiet clinic, aware of a strange new feeling taking root alongside her grief, something tentative and fragile, but undeniably alive. Something like hope. True to his word, Bryce appeared at the clinic the following afternoon for his bandage change. He looked better for a night's rest, though still trail-worn compared to the more settled men of Ruby City. He'd shaved, Olivia noticed, the strong line of his jaw now visible beneath a day's worth of stubble rather than a full trail beard. "The sheriff says you brought important information," she commented as she carefully removed the old dressing. Bryce nodded. "Luther Harmon kept a journal. After he died in the Helena robbery, the local law found it among his belongings. It contained names, dates, locations, details of every crime the gang committed over the past 3 years. Olivia's hand stilled momentarily. "Including?" "Yes," Bryce's voice softened. "Including the attack on your family. Luther wrote that it was planned as retaliation for your father's testimony, but also as a warning to others who might stand against them." Olivia swallowed hard, focusing on applying the fresh poultice Dr. Abernathy had prepared. And the remaining brothers, you know where they are. The journal mentioned a hideout in the Bighorn Mountains. That's where I'm headed after Cheyenne, regardless of my new assignment. His jaw tightened. The Harmons have evaded justice for too long. As Olivia wrapped the clean bandage around his ribs, her fingers occasionally brushing warm skin, she found herself wondering about this man who had made her family's justice his personal mission. "Why did you become a marshal?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "That's a long story." "I have time." Bryce studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I grew up in Missouri. My father was a lawyer, believed in law and order, the sanctity of the courts. During the war, he continued practicing while others took sides. Said justice couldn't take a holiday just because men decided to start shooting each other." His expression darkened. "After Appomattox, a group of former Confederate guerrillas decided he'd been too impartial during the conflict. They came to our home one night, killed him and my mother. My sister and I escaped only because we happened to be visiting neighbors." Olivia's heart constricted at the familiar pattern. "How old were you?" 17. "My sister was 15. Bryce's voice remained steady, but his eyes revealed old pain. "The local sheriff knew who did it but wouldn't act. Said it was war business best left buried. A federal marshal named Daniel Harding was different. He tracked down every last one of those men and brought them to justice. Not revenge justice." "And you wanted to be like him," Olivia surmised. Bryce nodded. "Became his deputy 2 years later. Worked with him until he retired. Been wearing this badge ever since." He smiled faintly. "Not the cheerful tale you were probably expecting." "No," Olivia agreed, securing the bandage with practiced hands. "But it explains much about you." Their eyes met, recognition of shared experience passing between them. Both had seen the worst humanity could offer. Both had survived. "What about your sister?" Olivia asked, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "Catherine lives in St. Louis now, married a doctor, has 3 children." Pride warmed his voice. "She found her way forward, and you've been chasing outlaws ever since. It's what I'm good at." There was no boast in the statement, merely acknowledgement of fact. "Is there nothing else you want from life?" Olivia asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider its boldness. Bryce regarded her thoughtfully. "There was a time I didn't think beyond the next assignment. Lately, I've found myself wondering what comes after." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to examine them directly. "Well," Olivia said, breaking the moment, "Dr. Abernathy says you should rest at least another day before traveling. The infection isn't completely cleared." Bryce smiled. "Are you giving me medical orders, Miss Thorne?" "I believe I am, Marshal Xavier." Their shared laughter felt like a small miracle, a moment of lightness neither had experienced in too long. The next 2 days established a pattern. Bryce would come to the clinic each afternoon for his bandage change, and afterward, they would talk. Sometimes about their pasts, sometimes about Ruby City's present, occasionally about nebulous futures. In those conversations, Olivia discovered a man of surprising depth, well-read despite limited formal education, thoughtful about justice beyond mere law enforcement, possessed of a dry humor that emerged when he was at ease. For his part, Bryce seemed equally interested in learning about Olivia. He listened intently as she spoke about growing up on the ranch, her mother's early death, her dreams of perhaps becoming a teacher before family responsibilities claimed her attention. "You'd make a fine teacher," he observed, "but you've got a healer's hands, doctor. Abernathy says you've taken to medicine like you were born to it." The compliment warmed her more than she cared to admit. On the 3rd day, Bryce arrived at the clinic with news. I've received a telegram from Cheyenne. My meeting has been postponed a week due to the territorial governor's schedule. It seems I'll be staying in Ruby City a bit longer than planned. Olivia couldn't deny the pleasure this news brought her. Your wound could use the additional recovery time. That's what I told myself, he agreed, though his smile suggested other reasons might be equally compelling. That evening, instead of parting after his treatment, Bryce asked if she might join him for supper at the cattleman's restaurant. To thank you for your care, he added hastily. Olivia accepted, changing into her best dress, a modest blue calico that complemented her gradually returning honey blonde hair. As she pinned up her tresses, she caught herself humming, a sound she hadn't made in months. The Cattleman's Hotel restaurant was Ruby City's finest establishment, boasting white tablecloths and a French chef lured from Denver with promises of exorbitant wages. Bryce had secured a table by the window, and he stood when Olivia entered, his appreciative gaze making her cheeks warm. "You look lovely," he said simply as he held her chair. Dinner proved to be the most pleasant evening Olivia had experienced since before the attack. Bryce was an attentive companion, drawing her into conversation that ranged from books they'd read to places they'd seen. He told her about the majesty of the Teton Mountains, while she described the wildflower meadows near her family's ranch in springtime. "I'd like to see those meadows someday," Bryce said, his tone making the simple statement feel significant. "They'll bloom again next year," Olivia replied, allowing herself to imagine a future where they might walk among those flowers together. Their meal concluded, but neither seemed eager for the evening to end. Bryce suggested a walk, and they strolled through Ruby City's quiet streets as stars emerged in the vast Wyoming sky. "The town is changing," Olivia observed as they passed the newly constructed schoolhouse. "For the better, I'd say." Bryce nodded toward the building. "When I first came through 5 years ago, this was little more than a mining camp with delusions of grandeur. Now it's becoming a proper town, the kind where people put down roots. The kind of town where a man might settle," his tone seemed to imply. "The kind of town where a woman might rebuild her life." They reached the small bridge over Ruby Creek, stopping to gaze at the water silvered by moonlight. "I leave for Cheyenne in 3 days," Bryce said after a comfortable silence. "I know. I'm not sure what assignment I'll receive after my meeting with the chief marshal. It might take me far from Wyoming Territory." Olivia nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling his words created. "That's the nature of your work." Bryce turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Olivia, I'm not a man who speaks easily about matters of the heart. My life hasn't allowed for attachments." "I understand," she said quickly, though her heart beat faster. "No, I don't think you do." He took a deep breath. "These past few days with you have shown me something I've been missing, something I didn't even know I wanted until I met you." Olivia's breath caught. "Bryce, I'm not asking for promises. It would be unfair given the circumstances, but I would like to write to you if you'd permit it. And perhaps when my business with the Harmons is concluded." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Olivia felt a surge of emotion, hope mingled with fear, desire tempered by caution. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Bryce's smile in response was like sunrise after the longest night. With careful deliberation, he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they enfolded hers. "Your hands are warmer now than when I found you," he murmured. "Life has returned to them," Olivia replied. "To all of me." They stood on the bridge for a long time, hands joined, possibilities expanding between them like the star-filled sky above. For the first time since the fire, Olivia felt fully alive, not merely surviving, but looking forward. The 3 days before Bryce's departure passed too quickly. They spent every available moment together, sharing meals, walking through town, talking for hours. Physical intimacy progressed no further than hand-holding, and on their final evening, a chaste kiss that nonetheless left Olivia breathless with its promise. "I'll write as soon as I reach Cheyenne," Bryce said as they stood outside her lodgings on his last night in Ruby City. "And I'll reply," Olivia promised. "Be careful, Bryce. The remaining Harmons know you're pursuing them." His expression hardened momentarily. "That works both ways. They should be afraid of me, not the other way around." "Nevertheless," Olivia insisted, "don't take unnecessary risks. There's more at stake now." The implied us hung in the air between them. Bryce nodded, his eyes softening as they met hers. "I'll remember that." Their parting kiss lingered longer than propriety strictly allowed, but Olivia found she didn't care what the town might whisper. She had lost too much to worry about trivial judgments. True to his word, Bryce's first letter arrived 10 days later, delivered by the eastbound stagecoach. His penmanship was surprisingly elegant for a man more accustomed to guns than pens. "My dear Olivia," it began, sending a thrill through her at the simple endearment. "Cheyenne is much as I remembered it, growing too quickly for its own good, filled with too many men seeking fortune and too few seeking honest work. My meeting with Chief Marshal Reynolds went as expected. He believes I've become obsessed with capturing the Harmons, and perhaps he's right. But when I explained my reasons, including what they did to your family, he relented somewhat. I've been given leave to pursue the remaining Harmon brothers, but with a condition. This is to be my final assignment as a federal marshal." Olivia gasped at this revelation, reading on eagerly. "After 6 years of service, Reynolds believes I should consider a more settled future. He mentioned a position with the territorial courthouse in Laramie that will open this winter. It would mean wearing a badge less often and a suit more frequently, but the work would still serve justice. I find myself surprisingly amenable to the idea, perhaps because, for the first time, I can imagine a life beyond the next outlaw, the next town, the next dusty trail. I ride for the Bighorn Mountains tomorrow with a small posse. If the information in Luther's journal proves accurate, we should find the Harmon hideout within a week. I don't know when I'll next be able to write, but please know that thoughts of you accompany me. Until then, I remain yours faithfully." Bryce. Olivia read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in her bureau drawer. That night, she wrote a reply she knew might not reach him for weeks, pouring her heart onto the pages in a way that would have scandalized her former self. Autumn descended on Ruby City in a blaze of gold and crimson. The aspens in the surrounding mountains turned butter yellow, their leaves quaking in the increasingly cool breezes. Olivia continued her work with Dr. Abernathy, her skill and confidence growing daily. The townspeople who had once viewed her with pity now sought her out specifically when they came to the clinic. "You have a gift," Dr. Abernathy told her one evening as they cleaned instruments after treating a miner's broken arm. "Have you considered formal training?" Olivia looked up in surprise. "For women, is that possible? Times are changing. There are medical colleges back east that accept female students now. With your intelligence and practical experience, you do well." The idea took root in Olivia's mind. Perhaps there was a future for her beyond the tragedy that had defined her recent past, a future that combined her newfound passion for healing with the possibility of a life shared with Bryce. 4 weeks passed with no word from the marshal. Olivia tried not to worry, knowing the Bighorn Mountains were remote and communication difficult. Still, each day without news stretched her nerves thinner. Then, on a blustery October morning, Henry Simmons burst into the clinic, waving a telegram. "Just came through from Sheridan," he announced breathlessly. "The Harmon gang has been captured." Olivia's heart leapt. "All of them? What about Marshal Xavier?" Henry's expression faltered slightly. "The telegram doesn't mention him specifically. Just says the remaining Harmon brothers were apprehended after a shootout. They're being transported to Cheyenne for trial." Though relieved at the news of the Harmon's capture, Olivia couldn't shake her concern about Bryce's silence. Had he been injured in the shootout? Or worse? 2 more agonizing days passed before another telegram arrived, this one addressed directly to Olivia. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "Harmon's captured, stop him wounded, but recovering, stop returning to Ruby City within week, stop. Have much to discuss, stop." Bryce relief flooded through her, followed quickly by concern over the nature of his wounds. But he was alive. The Harmons were captured, and he was coming back to Ruby City to her. The week that followed was the longest of Olivia's life. She threw herself into her work at the clinic, prepared her room for an extended absence, should she need to travel to meet Bryce, and contemplated what much to discuss might entail. Finally, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the westbound stagecoach arrived in Ruby City. Olivia stood outside the general store, her heart pounding as passengers disembarked. The last to emerge was Bryce, moving stiffly and with his left arm in a sling, but unmistakably alive. Their eyes met across the crowded street. Without regard for onlookers, Olivia gathered her skirts and rushed to him. Bryce's good arm opened to receive her, pulling her close as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You're here," she breathed against his chest. "You're really here." "I promised I'd come back," he murmured into her hair. They stood embracing until the stagecoach driver loudly cleared his throat while unloading luggage beside them. Reluctantly separating, they became aware of the curious glances from Ruby City's citizens. "Perhaps we should find somewhere more private to talk," Bryce suggested with a small smile. They ended up in the garden behind the clinic, seated on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree shedding golden leaves around them. Bryce looked thinner than when he'd left, with new lines etched around his eyes and a healing cut along his jawline. "The Harmons?" Olivia asked first, needing confirmation. "Captured and awaiting trial in Cheyenne," Bryce confirmed. "Ethan Harmon is dead. He chose to fight rather than surrender. Wade and Caleb are in custody. Given the evidence from Luther's journal and witness testimonies, they'll hang by spring." Olivia nodded, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her. The men who had destroyed her family would face justice, but it wouldn't bring back her father and brother. "Your arm?" she asked, gesturing to the sling. "Took a bullet during the standoff, clean through the shoulder. Painful, but it should heal completely with time." Bryce's expression softened. "The doctor in Sheridan wasn't nearly as gentle as you." Olivia smiled, though her eyes remained concerned. "You said in your telegram that we have much to discuss." "We do." Bryce shifted to face her more directly. "My time with the Marshal's service is ending, as I mentioned in my letter. Chief Reynolds has confirmed the position in Laramie is mine if I want it." "That's wonderful news," Olivia said, though uncertainty colored her voice. Laramie was nearly 100 miles from Ruby City. "It would be a good position," Bryce agreed. "Stable, respectable," he paused. "But I've been thinking about alternatives." "What kind of alternatives?" Bryce reached into his coat with his good hand and withdrew an official-looking document. "Ruby City's sheriff is retiring come spring. Mayor Jenkins approached me when I passed through last month, asking if I'd consider the position." Olivia's breath caught. "Sheriff of Ruby City? You'd stay here?" "If I had sufficient reason to." His blue eyes held her steadily. "Olivia, These past months of writing to you, thinking of you, they've shown me what I want for my future, who I want in my future." With careful movements, he shifted from the bench to one knee before her. From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band set with a modest pearl. "I've spent my life pursuing justice for others. Now I find myself wanting a different kind of pursuit, a home, a family, a life built with someone who understands both who I've been and who I hope to become." His voice deepened with emotion. "I'm asking if you would do me the great honor of becoming my wife." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as joy expanded in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Bryce. Yes." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was no longer restrained by impending separation. It held all the promise of their shared future. "I should warn you," Bryce said when they finally parted, "being a lawman's wife isn't always easy. There will be dangers, late nights, worries." Olivia touched his face gently. "I've already faced the worst this world can offer. What remains is the choice to embrace life despite its risks." She smiled. "Besides, Ruby City is becoming quite civilized. Your greatest challenge as sheriff might be breaking up Saturday night poker disputes." Bryce laughed, the sound warming Olivia to her core. "Perhaps, and perhaps this territory still has need of those who stand for justice." His expression grew serious again. "But whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," Olivia agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. Their wedding took place that December in Ruby City's newly completed church. Dr. and Mrs. Abernathy stood as witnesses, along with Sheriff Coleman and Bryce's sister Catherine, who traveled from St. Louis with her family for the occasion. The town turned out in full, celebrating not only the union, but also the appointment of their new sheriff. Spring arrived the following year, bringing with it wildflowers that carpeted the prairie just as Olivia had described. True to his word, Bryce took her to see the meadows near her family's former ranch. Standing together amid the riot of colors, they decided to build their new home there, not on the exact site of the tragedy, but close enough to honor the memory of those lost while creating something new. By the time their first child was born, a daughter they named Olivia James Xavier, honoring both their fathers, Ruby City had grown into a prosperous community. The railroad brought new opportunities, and the violent days of the frontier began giving way to a more orderly existence. Bryce proved an effective sheriff, respected for his fairness and unwavering principles. Olivia continued her medical work, eventually opening a small practice adjacent to their home where she treated women and children specifically. When Alina was 5, they welcomed a son, Matthew Samuel. Completing their family, on warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch watching their children play in the yard, marveling at how fully life had restored what once seemed irretrievably lost. "Did you ever imagine this?" Olivia asked on one such evening as they celebrated their 10th anniversary. "That night when you found me in the ashes." Bryce took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band that had been joined by a wedding ring years ago. "I knew only that I couldn't let you slip away. Everything else this life we've built was beyond imagining then. Yet here we are." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Sometimes I think about what might have happened if you hadn't ridden past our ranch that morning." "Don't," Bryce said softly. "Some paths are too dark to contemplate, even in retrospect." Olivia nodded, understanding completely. They had both walked through fire to reach this place of peace, she literally, he through years of pursuing those who had hurt others. The scars remained, both visible and hidden, but they had long since ceased to define their existence. "You kept your promise," she said, squeezing his hand. That day you found me when you said I would warm again in your arms." Bryce smiled, pulling her closer as the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson colors that now signified not destruction, but the beauty of endings that herald new beginnings. "Some promises," he murmured against her temple, "are the easiest in the world to keep.